What do you do when people in your church misuse you in some way? And it does happen. If you're watching this video, there's a good chance you're a Christian and that you've gone to church. And if you've attended any church, Catholic, Protestant, Charismatic, Revival, I've gone to them all, and they're all the same in one regard. It's all people there with God's Spirit, you know, and everybody there's for their own reason, usually good reasons. They're trying to worship the Lord and enjoy the fellowship and all the gifts you get. You can get a lot out of church. It's a good thing. And Americans, sadly, a lot of them have gotten away from that, and they're really missing out. Because I can tell you, you come out of church, it can really leave you feeling whole again, you know, and recharged and such. Church is a good thing. Going to church in person is a very good thing. And I've always looked at church, going to church, as God's family in this community, whatever community it's in. God's family coming together once a week, usually once, sometimes more, to like a family reunion at the Father's house. For the same reasons you would go to your earthly fathers or parents as a family to get together for a reunion. And every week, I've got neighbors that they get together, looks like two or maybe three generations get together every weekend, and they have a big dinner at my neighbor's house. And I think that's great. I love seeing families together. I really do. I see church, that's how I see church, as a family reunion. And you have to be, you're in your Father's house. It has a holy, sacred place. But it is made up of people who have jobs and other families, and they've got problems. You've got people with personality issues in church. Not everybody that comes to church is, I don't know what, you know, what's normal, you know. You've got narcissists that go to church. You've got depressed people that go to church. You've got all kinds of people that go to church. And most of the people that go to church are pretty good people, and they're trying to live a Christian life. They're going to church for their own reasons, but I think from what I've seen, most people go to church for the right reasons, to worship, to commune with God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And there is something about being with other people together, you know, taking in the message, and this, you know, hopefully when the priest or pastor, whichever, you know, God anoints them to give a good sermon, it really is powerful. It's like a live performance, but God working through this person, the Holy Spirit working through to move. And sometimes you can actually sense the Holy Spirit's presence in church. And it's a magical thing. You'll come out of there. I never, you know, some people seem to go to church just for what I call the spiritual high, to each their own. I go to church to learn and to worship, you know, and I don't really go there for other people, but I don't mind the other people either, for that matter. Everybody's different. So if you go to church enough, regularly, and the people there will try to get to know you, and I'm a hard person to get to know, but you go in there kind of wide open sometimes, you know, vulnerable, open for God and love. But sometimes people in church can rub you the wrong way. Sometimes churches form cliques, and those cliques can rub a lot of people the wrong way, and sometimes you'll get different cliques within a church, and it can divide things. And it must be a real pain in the neck for a pastor or a priest to have to deal with a church with certain individuals within it that mean well, but they're causing divisions, you know, and within the church. And the Apostle Paul dealt with this. In the New Testament, the letters the Apostle Paul wrote to the Corinthians and Ephesians and such, and instructions to Timothy, you get that he's writing letters to people that he's hearing are having a lot of problems within the church and how they're conducting themselves, and sometimes infighting in the church. And I've seen that personally in my life, myself. And I had a person tell me, sometimes you don't know if people can really hurt you in church. Not often, but it can happen. What do you do? How do you handle it? You know, some people, they turn away from, they stop going to church. And I had somebody hurt me, said something to me, somebody that I really kind of let in, said something to me that really kind of hurt, that they would say that to me. You know, they said they thought that I was in a spiritually dark place. And they didn't say it in a very nice way either. And I don't know what prompted them to say that. And it's the kind of thing that makes you really question, like briefly, am I? I'm trying to do my best, you know. What do I got to do? It's not by works, it's by grace, you know. And so I don't believe what they said at all. But, you know what? How do I handle that? This person's just a human being. And I believe they're a good person. But you get that. I've seen a church, one time I went to church. I'll give this one example, then I'll get on with this, where I'm going with it. And it's biblical. But myself, when I was a young man in my 20s, I belonged to a church, a rural church. And I was active duty military then, but I went to church all the time. I loved it there, this church. And they had what they called a ministry to children and to youth. That was their special ministry, because children love going to this church. They just loved it. Sunday school was great, and they had activities. I don't know what, but kids loved this church. So there was a lot of underprivileged people in this rural area, poor people, really poor people. I know. Appalachian, kind of really poor people. And, you know, it's not that their parents couldn't drive them to church. It's that their parents just didn't want to be bothered, quite frankly. They weren't so poor they couldn't drive their kids to church. They just didn't. So myself and some others ran a ministry where we drove a church van around and picked kids up Sunday morning and brought them to church. And there wasn't anything weird or devious going on. You know, you hear kids, church, it's too easy to put together the wrong picture. We're talking about pedophiles. They're in every walk of life. They're definitely in churches. They're definitely in our educational system. There are pedophiles in the military, for a fact. There are pedophiles in the police force. There's pedophiles everywhere. They like to single out the church because it just seems horrible that anywhere, schools. I'm not talking about there wasn't anything like that going on in this church. And quite frankly, my whole life, I've never been in a church where I knew that to be going on, though it does. And if there's something like that going on, you go to the police, period. I'm talking about other things. We'd bring the kids to church. It was a really good thing. It was a good thing. And that church was alive. And then I got reassigned somewhere else. And I came back to visit, and the church was, half the congregation wasn't there anymore. And I found out what happened. The church formed cliques within it. And a group of people in the church, the ones that donated most of the money in the church, that's what I was told, were upset with our pastor, who was a wonderful person, Pastor Benham, who's gone on to be with the Lord. A very, very good man and pastor and spiritual leader. Very good. Wonderful person. Filled with love and the Holy Spirit. But they were upset with him because they said he was bringing in just children there, and the children weren't bringing in any money. And they wanted a new pastor, the type of pastor, a younger man. This pastor then he was about my age now. He was, about my age where I'm at now. They wanted a new pastor that would bring in a different crowd, a crowd that had finances to give. And I'm not making this up. And half the church were extremely deeply upset over this. And they actually managed to force Pastor Benham out of that church. And they brought a new guy in and took his place. And about half the church quit going. They were that upset. And so it was just, if it was even half, the congregation was ripped to shreds, honestly. And I listened to this man, young man that replaced Pastor Benham. And he was a very good man too, very spirit-filled, good man. But he came in on a bad note, and I don't think he got a fair chance, honestly. So these are the kind of problems that you can run into in church if you go to the same church long enough. Unfortunately, you will see these kind of divisions and personal struggles and strifes and things. And what do you do about it? I mean, like I said, I just had somebody hurt me in church, just said something that was hurtful to me. And because this is a person that I felt open to, because it's a church member, and we're getting along pretty good, and that just, they became so judgmental of me, and now I'm judgmental on them. But I'm just telling you, I got bruised a little bit, and it took me a couple of days to sort it out, and I did sort it out. And I've been praying to God if He had a message for me, to give me a message, and I didn't have one until I realized that this was a message. And this is a common problem, that it was happened in the Apostle Paul's time, because a lot of the New Testament letters from Paul to his churches, his early churches, was him trying to deal with the same situations that I just told you about. A lot of struggling and strife, and people trying to jockey for position within, and people are going to church to try to raise up the right reasons, to try to raise themselves up morally to a higher place than they were before they went to church. Problem is, once they start feeling that they're morally at a higher level than they were before they went to church, some people can start becoming judgmental, and they lose track of what is real to all of us, what is universal from God to all of us. And the Apostle Paul, he wrote a letter to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. I'm going to read this. Hopefully my eyes are getting dimmer and dimmer. And this is Paul's answer. And I'm going to close with this. But this is Paul's answer to a church that was full of infighting and struggles and strife within, at the clique level, and people were had spiritual gifts that were just, people weren't getting along. And it's all right. I'll read Paul's answer to these people. This looks like I got shadows. All right, I should have worn my hat, but all right. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Paul. So I got a dark shadow on top. I can see it. Looks kind of funny. Like you got a toupee on or something. It's the camera. All right, Paul's letter to Corinthians, chapter 1, verse 13. I'm going to close with this. Don't quit going to church, and don't be angry with people, all right? So take from this what you will. I'll read it. If I could speak all the languages of earth and of angels, but didn't love others, I would only be a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I had the gift of prophecy, and I understood all of God's secret plans and possessed all knowledge, and if I had such faith that I could move mountains, but didn't love others, I would be nothing. If I gave everything I have to the poor, and even sacrificed my body, which Paul would do, ultimately, I could boast about it, but if I didn't love others, I would have gained nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up. It never loses faith. It is always hopeful and endures through every circumstance. Prophecy and speaking in unknown languages and special knowledge will become useless, but love will last forever. Now our knowledge is partial and incomplete, and even the gift of prophecy reveals only part of the whole picture. But when the time of perfection comes, these partial things will become useless. When I was a child, I spoke and thought and reasoned as a child. But when I grew up, I put away childish things. Now we see things imperfectly, like puzzling reflections in a mirror. But then we will see everything with perfect clarity. All that I know now is partial and incomplete. But then I will know everything completely, just as God knows me completely, and you. 3 things will last forever: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. That was Paul's message to the Corinthians, the church, in 1 Corinthians 13. And I'm going to let that stand for its own.